Stephen. How are you doing?
Hey, Christy, how are you doing?
I am doing so well, thank you. I'm so excited for this session.
Yeah, the technology worked, which is that's always a good start. Yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah, I was slightly worried about this, and I mean, it's just such a wonderful thing to talk about Irish whiskey. I was like, I cannot fall at the first hurdle and just not be able to log in.
Yeah. I think we were triple checking and all those things. So yeah, look, great it works, and great to have a chance to speak to you.
Yeah, well, likewise. I have so many questions for you. I guess we're live and we've got some people watching, so this is fabulous.
Yeah, this will never be forgotten.
Never be forgotten, not at all. Just to say, if you are watching and you do have like questions to put to Stephen, please pop them in the little session chat and we can get to them as well, because we've got an hour. I've got 3 delicious drams here, and I know you've got some things up your sleeve, including
I do. I've already poured myself one, but I think I'll pace myself because I still have to put my kids to bed.
Right, yes. I mean,
I put me to bed. Yeah.
I mean, the 90s yet young.
Exactly.
So before we get going, I've poured myself one of your single grain as a dram because it's one of my all-time favourites. And we'll get onto the technicalities of the expression in due course, but even just nosing it, I'm like, yes, this is good. This is excellent.
Yeah. And it's always a good start to any interview or conversation that the more Teeling whiskey you drink, the better we sound and look. So this is a tried and tested family matter. Yeah.
Exactly. Wonderful. So I guess if we should get going, really. It's just after 5. I mean, I do think we run the risk of just chatting about Irish whiskey till the cows come home, but I'm going to try and keep us slightly on topic.
Okay.
And I guess first of all, for this, tell us about Teeling. Who is Teeling? What is
Who are we?
Who are you guys?
Yeah, well, I suppose it's myself and my brother Jack as the recent generation of Teeling involved in Irish whiskey. So go back a long time. We have deep roots in Irish whiskey. The most recent one would be my father, who set up Cooley Distillery in the 80s. So he was reminding us that he is the veteran of this new age of Irish whiskey. So I think over 30 years involved in Irish whiskey. And I think the family started, its roots were originally in the city of Dublin, was where the first original family distillery was, going back a very, very long time ago, 1782. And it was back when there was the last golden era of Irish whiskey. So there were over 37 separate distilleries in the city of Dublin. Irish whiskey was the biggest selling whiskey in the world. And, you know, fast forward that to probably when my dad got back into Irish whiskey. Irish whiskey had undergone an implosion. It had gone from the world's biggest selling Irish whiskey to about 1%. All of those big distilleries in Dublin had shut. One distillery was making all the whiskey, all the brands, and my father came up with the crazy idea to get back into Irish whiskey as the family, but also set up the first new independent distillery in Ireland in nearly 100 years. And so myself and my brother had a very unusual upbringing. Family businesses are crazy at the best of times, but we grew up in a family business of whiskey. So we, cut our teeth in my father's distillery and had a chance to travel the world, making the case for Irish whiskey, promoting Irish whiskey, traveling around and seeing different trends and different opportunities. And I think it was 2012 when myself and my brother got an opportunity to do our own thing. And we came up with the idea to relaunch our family brand, but go right back to where it started for us as a family, right back to the city of Dublin. So rebuild the family distillery right in the heart of the city of Dublin. Again, not do the most conventional things. I think everyone thought we were a bit mad going back into the city centre. The view was, look, the city of Dublin used to be the epicenter for where Irish whiskey was produced. It made absolutely no sense that nobody was making whiskey in the city again. In the area, the Liberties, where the family first started and where we went back to, it used to be called the Golden Triangle because so much whiskey was made there. And even by today's standards, it would have been some of the world's biggest distilleries or in the heart of the city. So when our opportunity came around, we said, look, my father's generation did things their way. We had been lucky enough, I suppose, to go out and see Irish whiskey in a very different way and maybe put our own stamp on it. For our generation, it wouldn't be maybe as nostalgic Irish whiskey. It's more about now and the future. And I think we had seen a lot of these trends of urban regeneration. So you look at Brooklyn, you look at London, areas in London, people were going back into where things used to be made and regenerating. And that was really the view. That was our view, that we felt the Teeling family had some unfinished business, but also Dublin as a city really deserved to have a distillery again. And, fast forward, Jesus, seems longer, 8 years to where we are now. And the distillery has had over 500,000 people visit it. We're selling in over 70 countries around the world, bringing out hopefully what we feel are some of the most innovative and interesting Irish whiskies that maybe hadn't been done before. And we didn't maybe have that legacy that I think in my father's generation, he regenerated a lot of older brands. For us, it was almost like a clean slate to say, look, the past is the past. What about now in the future? And take a lot of the learnings. And to be fair, my father gave us a lot of responsibility very early, sink or swim. And I think we learned a lot from things that worked and things that didn't work. And for us, Irish whiskey was really, really on that cusp of segmentation, dominated by one or two big global brands. People we felt were open to trying something different. And that was really the genesis of it. People were willing to maybe discover Irish whiskey in a different way.
Yeah. And there's so many aspects of what you just said that I want to unpick a little bit. Yeah. But two things struck me was, 8 years ago, but 8 years is a long time in the sort of renaissance of Irish whiskey. So much has happened there. Yeah. I feel like you'd be hard pushed to find another drinks category that's seen the pace of change that Irish whiskey has. Yeah. So that's incredible. Yeah. But also, you mentioned unconventional sort of practices and unconventional methods. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're actually doing on the production side to bring this kind of new wave of whiskey making to life while still honouring that heritage? Yeah.
So I think one of the key learnings that we got from my father was always focus on the liquid, always focus on the whiskey as the one thing that you can control. And I think Alex Chasko, who's our master blender and master distiller, kind of Whiz, who came with us when we set up the company, and he was the head of innovations in Cooley. And when he came with us, he really had a different view on Irish whiskey. I think for probably 40 or 50 years, there was one way in which Irish whiskey had been made. And he came as a bit of a maverick, a different approach to Irish whiskey, because he was an American, a big Oregonian or from Portland, Oregon, and he had formerly been in craft beer. So didn't necessarily see Irish whiskey in the same way as a lot of Irish whiskey producers would. And what we had seen, in particular for our first product that we launched, which would have been our small batch, there was a real need to maybe layer on some complexities on Irish whiskey. So Irish whiskey is a very, very solid canvas, but where we felt there were some gaps and things that we could add was taking a very different approach of non-chill filtering, going and maybe sourcing casks that hadn't been really applied to Irish whiskey before. So a lot of it would have been triple distilled, XAB or bourbon casks. A lot of the whiskeys were made in the same place. And we felt, look, by layering in some complexities of innovative wood maturation and bottling at higher strength so you don't have to chill filter, we could take that to the next level without probably alienating what people liked about Irish whiskey. So first product that we launched would have been our small batch, which again is, there you go, for us was a real category breaker. A lot of blended Irish whiskey would have been very similar. We had experience selling a blended Irish whiskey for many, many years. So we said, look, let's not go down that route of something that's already probably doing a good job. Let's look and see if we can layer something else into it. And worked a lot with the Irish Whisky Society here in Ireland, and had taken a lot of learnings and inspirations from what we had seen probably in other categories as well, with bourbon and single malt scotch, and said, look, this is a blank canvas. This is literally, we can maybe do what we want to a level, and really took our time with it. And so the first product that we launched had never been done before within Irish whiskey. So it was a non-chill filtered blended Irish whiskey that's married in rum barrels for an extra 12 months.
Incredible.
Yeah, and really, really, particularly for a lot of the Irish whiskey traditionalists, kind of worried them a bit, because this was a big departure from what we had done. And I think, we had some confidence that we liked the liquid. We had sense checked it with the Irish Whisky Society. So we were confident that the liquid was good. We just weren't 100% sure what the reception would be like worldwide. And so that was the first one that we did. And I think as we were building out the distillery, we were lucky enough from the previous family distillery that we had lots of stock of different ages and different variations that we could put our own teeling effect on it by layering in different casks. So the one that you had, the single grain, was number 2 that we launched, which is fully matured in California red wine barrels. Again, Cabernet Sauvignon barrels that I think Alex had always viewed California red wine and Irish whiskey would make perfect bedfellows, that it's light enough that it doesn't mask some of those underlying flavors, but it's complex enough to be interesting. And it's just under 6 years. It's non-chill filtered. Again, everything we do is 46% non-chill filtered. And again, we do a lot of taste tests on the barrels just to make sure, look, we're not overcooking it in any way. So just under 6 years. And that was number 2 that we brought out. So a single grain, fully matured in Californian red wine barrels was, again, totally new. A bit of a risk, you know, because single grain in itself was in its infancy when we launched, but also launching something that had such a unique taste profile. Just for us, I think we had to take some chances, you know, and again, you have to back yourself. It's a very, very tough industry that if you're not confident in your liquids, you know, you probably shouldn't be rolling it out. Number 3 that we brought out would have been our single malt, which, again, the technical side with 46% non-chill filters. And it's really just looking at different casks and ways and means in which we can excite the whiskey drinker, because some of the feedback that we got was that, look, there was, you know, a latent interest in Irish whiskey, fastest growing brown spirit in the world for the last 10, 15 years, predominantly dominated by one big brand that everyone would know. People were saying to us, well, what's next? What else is there for us to be interested enough? And what's been really surprising for me is how fast people now are moving along that journey. You know, generations ago, they were very brand loyal to the point they probably wouldn't discover something else. Whereas now it seems like, boom, that discovery journey is huge. And I think for us, we wanted to have enough elements there to tick the box, to excite people, have a bit of fun with it. Irish whiskey predominantly is very social. It's a little bit softer. It's a little bit easier on the palate. And we would find that we can have a bit more fun. So I remember, like, when we first went to the, you know, I think I've met you and Melita and a lot of the gang at these whiskey shows going back a very long time ago. They weren't nearly as much fun. They weren't, people were very strict at what they did. I only drank scotch, or I only drink this, or I only drank that. And I think seeing that change probably come about, even as we've evolved as a company, has been really refreshing that people are open. So when we're presenting new styles of Irish whiskey, it's not just, oh, well, I don't drink that style. It's, well, tell me about it. Let me taste it. It might necessarily be their particular repertoire, but they're open. And that is a new generation. It's, you know, guys, girls, older, younger. I think it's a mindset. I don't think it's a specific demographic. I think it's just an openness to discover something new. And what we're finding is, with all this energy now within Irish whiskey, with a lot of new entrants in doing really cool things, the bigger brands now innovating, it's just breeding a lot of energy and passion. And I think last year, unfortunately, it won't be done this year, Whisky Live in Dublin, I've never seen more interesting things happening within the Irish whiskey space. It used to be, you know, 10 or 15 years ago. I remember my first ever whiskey show. My father, for whatever reason, sent me to Whisky Live up in Scotland and nearly ate me for dinner up there, I think, trying to make the case for Irish whiskey. And I think fast forward now, 10, 15 years down the road, there are so many good people doing good things within Irish whiskey. And I think that will only lead to more interesting expressions being released and more interest from people on a global scale. Because I think I touched on it. Irish whiskey was 60% of the world whiskey sales, fell off a cliff to just 1%. It's still only about 8 or 9% of the world whiskey sales. Scotch is still massive. American whiskey is still much bigger than Irish whiskey. But that energy, and I think you touched on it, a lot of good people doing good things within Irish whiskey will hopefully pay off.
Absolutely. And you know what? There's still so much room to grow. When you put that in context of the size of the pie that Irish whiskey accounts for, it's tiny, and there's just so much excitement. And just to echo from my personal experience, I first discovered whiskey in 2012. So I feel like I got into being so passionate about the spirit at the same time that everyone was like, but I want you flavor. Whiskey doesn't have to be this, like, more one-dimensional form. There's so much you can do with it.
Yeah.
There's one question I wanted to ask you just before we move on, because I feel like touch at the ethos and the heart of Teeling. For anyone who's watching who doesn't quite know, could you just run through what non-chill filtration is and why that's so important to particularly the mouthfeel of your spirit?
Yeah, I think, like, you've grown up with these type of terms. You think everyone knows them, but the non-chill filtering, it just basically means, if you can see in the glass here, or it just means more of the fatty acids. We haven't chill filtered it, so we've left all of the flavor from the barrel still in it. So there might be some of those, see that legs if you can. Unfortunately, it'd be probably better if we're in front of you. But what it just means is, by bottling at the higher strength, that 46%, we don't have to chill filter. So anything that you would find around 40% alcohol, which would have been the standard for Irish whiskey, would be chill filtered. It just means an extra layer is taken out. And for us, it was adding rather than taking away. So I think we had done quite a lot of that with single malts. Obviously, Scotch single malt have done it for a long time. And we said, look, why don't we take that approach to Irish whiskey and see where it gets us? And I think it's, for us, added a really big part of that mouthfeel and that flavor component that for ourselves, it's just the core. Once we tasted it at that level, we had to bottle everything at non-chill filter. So the core range will all be at 46%. We do some cask strengths, we do some higher strengths for some of the weird and the wonderful. And I think for us, it was more about leaving more flavor, more compounds in there. And I think definitely the whiskey drinker, and I've seen that, definitely accelerate in the last 4 to 5 years. A lot of them want those flavor compounds still in it. They don't want things taken out. They want to leave it in its natural form. And it's crazy how viscous it makes the glass, and it actually does really make an impact.
It so does. And I just wanted to dig into that a little bit, because I often feel when we're nosing whiskey or tasting whiskey, we so often write down flavor descriptors, but that mouthfeel is so important to the drinking experience.
Absolutely. And I think, that for me is the reason we get into whiskey. I think it's just trying to create a liquid that you're passionate about, but hopefully that moment of discovery where somebody says, wow, I never knew Irish whiskey could taste like that. That is what gets you out of bed in the morning. That's the reason we did this, because the whiskey industry is a very, very tough place. It's, we're not even talking about a 5-10 year horizon. We're talking about 15, 20 years. It's a marathon, and swings, roundabouts, and everything in between. And I think the passion that has to be there, particularly when you set up your own one, you have to really, really love the liquids. Because there are tough times, and there are, as you know yourself, some sleepless nights. And I think the great thing about it is we've always been production led. Like, we've always been distilleries. We've always had our distillery. So the key premise was get back distilling, get back open. And that really, really focused our minds, that we knew exactly what we wanted to do in Dublin. We knew exactly how quick we wanted to move. So now that we have our own production, and we've actually now got both ends. So we can control the grains that we use. We've actually done a proprietary yeast strain. We can control how we run the stills, all the way up to all those goodies before it goes into the barrel. And I think that, for me, is hugely refreshing, because we're in control of our own destiny then. So, we built the distillery from scratch. So every part of that distillery we were involved in, which is really unique. And we've been able to now create whiskies from scratch. We produced, we made, all the way to point to bottling them is, for me, that's a huge buzz. That is the fact that we have now created a whole range of Dublin-distilled whiskies that will hopefully go on for future generations, exciting whiskey drinkers.
Yeah, it sounds like an exhilarating ride. And I just want to say, we move on to what you're doing next, which I'm so excited about. If you're watching and you've got questions, do pop them in the chat and we will pepper them into the conversation. But I feel like that's such a great introduction. You've immersed us into the history of the distillery and why it's important to be back in Dublin. But you have got some delicious developments going on right now that you're going to share with us, which is incredible.
Yeah, we do. I think, look, we all know it's a very unusual year. Let's just call it that. That's a pleasant way of describing it. But I think there was in March, we've always been innovation led. So we had a pipeline of things that we were planning on bringing out. And then most people had said, whoa, put the brakes on. And we were at that point, we were like, maybe we should. And actually, we just thought about it. We said, you know what? In the year that's in it, let's just keep going. Let's give people something to get them excited about. Let's do what we do best, which is bring out some really interesting whiskies. So for our sins, I think we launched, we were meant to launch for St. Patrick's Day this year, 2 or 3 whiskies. It obviously didn't happen. Paddy's Day was a funny time this year. We put the brakes on and then launched them in June. So Brabazon 3 was number 3 in the family. There you go. Yeah, which again is a very interesting range that we do of single malts. We source some really cool Pedro Jimenez casks from a place down in Portugal, Jimenez Spinola, that it was a little bodega that Alex Chasco had gone down and suffered hard to go and drink his way around for 3 or 4 days. I managed to get his hands on some really, really nice casks. And we launched that in June, really, really successful. An extension of our other Brabazon Series 1 and Series 2. And that came out, around June and launched in the summer. We had our 28, which you can see has been taxed a little bit from my own QC that we brought out in June as well, which was a continuation of this journey that we had with a 1991 distillate that we had matured in Sauterne casks, that we did a 21-year-old, a 24-year-old, which actually the 24-year-old version won World's Best Single Malt last year. And this 28 is the bigger brother 4 years on from it, that we were hoping to launch at the World Whisky Awards this year, but alas, it didn't happen. So we launched that in June. And the cool thing about this year as well is that a lot of the whiskies that we distilled in Dublin were now coming of age. So we actually launched last year our pot still whiskey, which was fully mature or fully distilled in Dublin. So for people who don't know, pot still whiskey is unique to Ireland. It's basically a composite in the mash bill of 50% malted, 50% unmalted barley. And Dublin back in the day was the renowned location for Dublin pot still whiskey. So when we were setting up, we built in the flexibility in the distillery that you can do different grain feeds. So single malt, single pot still, peated single malt, crystal rye. We can produce all of these feeds, and pot still for us, it's almost like a rebirth because it hadn't been done for such a long time. So this was the first new pot still whiskey out of Dublin in such a long time that this was number 1 in our Dublin Reborn whiskies.
And I just want to dip into, talk to us about what flavour a parcel of unmalted barley would add.
Yeah.
Because it's a critical part kind of to the history of Irish whiskey, and to bring this back is a big deal. Yeah.
Again, we probably gloss over things like, sure, everyone knows these things, but the pot still aspect, we actually created, it was an old school recipe. So 50% malted, 50% unmalted barley was kind of the go-to for these heavier pot stills out of Dublin. So the unmalted barley in the mash just is much thicker, and it's much harder to drain. And what that means is there's a lot more cereal, a lot more of these fruit forward notes that carries through into the wash. So there's a bit of spice in it as well. It would be a much fuller flavor probably than people would be used to within Irish whiskey, which again for us was cool. We're bringing this back, but then we layered on top the Teeling effect, which was different innovative barrels. So we used 3 different styles of barrels. So the backbone of it would be ex-bourbon barrels, but then we actually used some virgin oak and also some sherry. So I think the interesting thing for us was we weren't 100% sure of what it was going to come out as, because this was new. And as it was evolving in the barrel, it actually really changed our perceptions. We thought it was going to be much more leaning towards probably a sherry, to be fair, because that's what we had thought. But as it was actually maturing in the barrels, it evolved into something totally different. And because we were involved in it for, from basically day one, we could actually evolve it and change it. And again, to bring out a Dublin pot still for us was a huge big deal. It was our first whiskey in come out of the new distillery for such a long time. It was a real homecoming. So again, a lot of the whiskey now that we've been producing in Dublin has been now used in our small batch, in our blend. Number 2 will be something that we were very passionate about in our previous distillery. We brought peated single malt back into Irish whiskey in our previous distillery. So my dad, I think, was almost chased out of town when he even mentioned the word peated Irish whiskey, because back in the day, there was one distillery making everything, and it was triple distilled, non-peated. It was almost as if it was the law. Whereas if anyone has ever been to Ireland, vast majority of our landmass is covered in peat, turf. And prior to getting access to coal, everything would have used peat. It's a fuel source. So we would have cooked with it, would have heated ourselves with it. Distilleries would have used it. And it got pretty much written out of history because they say the victors or the survivors write the history. So my dad had a view to bring a peated Irish single malt out, and it was a brand called Connemara that really changed a lot of perceptions with single malt drinkers as to what Irish whiskey could be. So with our experience there, we said straight away when we got back into production, we wanted to bring out a triple distilled versus double, which is what my dad did, a triple distilled peated single malt out of Dublin. And again, people are like, can you even do that? Is that even legal? We're like, yes, absolutely. It's just nobody had done it. So when the opportunity came to lay down that stock, we had built in the flexibility in the distillery to be able to do it. And again, there's an area in the distillery right beside our distillery. So we're in the Liberties. The Liberties was the heart of manufacturing. It was the heart of the city of Dublin. It's where Guinness is made. It's where a lot of the bigger breweries and distilleries were. There's an area called Black Pits. And again, some people looked at us with raised eyebrows saying, why the hell would you choose a name, Black Pits? You know, where's your marketing manager? What's wrong with you people? Black Pits was an area where some of the biggest malting houses were, and that was right beside the distillery. So for us, and again, this is actually launching. It hasn't even been launched yet. So if we were at the Whisky Show, it would be the one that I'd have under the counter and I'd be pouring it all sneakily out. So I'll give a quick little look at what the bottle might look like.
I mean, look, it's beautiful, and this is so exciting. This is what I was hoping to see from you.
This is going to be released on Tuesday. So first, peated single malts out of Dublin in probably over a century. There's no documented peated single malts out of Dublin. It would have been more rural. And again, an evolution in the packaging, because we were saying, look, this is really cool. This is something totally new. It's a triple distilled peated single malt, fully distilled in Dublin. And what we had found from the 21, 24, and 28 peated single malt, we had actually utilized some Sauterne casks, and we had found actually Sauterne works incredibly well with peated single malt. So we actually chose a really heavy in the malt and peated. It was about 55 in the phenol level, which is quite high. But going through that triple distillation process, it actually reduces down considerably. So it's only about 15 when it comes out the other end. So we had never triple distilled peated single malt before. So for us, we were really surprised at that as well. But what we found was we put 1/3 of that fully distilled peated single malt into Sauterne casks from day one. And then 2/3 of that would have been in bourbon. And we brought those together, and it's really interesting. So it's quite young and zesty, but it has this. Alex, as I said, who probably has barbecued more than any Irish person will ever barbecue in their entire lives, said to me, it's like, when you put a pineapple on a barbecue. I said, I've never done that. I'm Irish. We barely see the sunshine. So it's almost that sweetness that comes from that caramelized sugar that is married really, really nicely with the peat smoke. And it would be more barbecue smoke than your heavy iodine or medicinal. And so it was really, really important for us. We didn't want to copy, the flavor profiles from Ireland, because that's not what Irish whiskey is. We wanted to create a peated malt that was inherently Irish. How we went about that, we didn't fully know at the start. But as we went through the process and being involved in every step from the new make all the way up to tasting it after 6 months, 12 months, all the way up to when we bottled it, we were so involved with it and seeing the evolution of the liquids really gave us confidence that we were onto something. So, lean probably more towards your Scapa, more that heather sweetness versus probably smoke out your ears, bang your chest. That's just not what Irish whiskey really is. And again, 46% non-chill filtered. And, it's for me to be involved in bringing a peated single malt for the first time ever out of a Dublin distillery is just really cool. And I adore peated single malt. So this for me, we were like, when are we going to be able to bloody bottle this? I see just a couple of questions coming through. Coming to the US. So yeah, we'll be coming to the US, launching January 1st into the US. And somebody's saying, what's the ppm? ppm on the final product will be about 15. And in the malt, prior to going through the distillation process, it was 55. That's the highest you can actually get on a commercial basis. And I think the source of the peat for malting is a very, very valid and interesting question. In Ireland, there is none of the malting houses create peated malt. The demand isn't there. So we had to actually go to Scotland, and we we had an idea of the style that we wanted. So went more Speyside and got the guys to source basically the lighter style of peated malt. Hopefully, and again, depending on how the reception will be to our little bad boy here, that in the future there will be enough demand, because it used to be a big thing that was done probably up until maybe the 60s or the 70s, and it just fell away. So there's a couple of big customers who buy a lot of malt. You can imagine them, the big breweries and some of the who wouldn't have an interest in peated malt. And I know Alex had been speaking to a lot of the guys to be the Malting House of Ireland or Bort Malt, or peppering them saying we want it. And they were saying, look, let's get to a certain scale where there would be the offtake, and hopefully we get there. But like, you'd love to have it on your doorstep. Just unfortunately, it's not there yet. Maybe we'll start again.
Yeah, it will be awesome. I mean, keep your questions coming in if you're watching. I have some questions off the back of this. Are there any types of cask or cask finishes that you think would work really well with the peated spirit that you've got that you've not tried yet?
Yeah, good question. Because we in Irish whiskey have a really, really big amount of flexibility versus probably other categories where you can utilize different varietals of oak. So we have gone down a range of experimenting with chestnut, acacia. If anyone had the pleasure of being on our Wonders of Wood tasting maybe 2 weeks ago, they would have tasted things like Amberana and Brazilian hardwood. And we luckily, and just due to relationships and probably synergies, have managed to get our hands on a lot of really cool casks. So Irish virgin oak was another one that we used, another one called chinkapin. I think the interesting thing is you want balance. So we always have to stop ourselves sometimes from going down that rabbit hole of, oh, that's so cool, let's just do it. I think at the end of the day, it has to come back to what you're attempting to achieve with the liquid. So the Sauternes cask for us, they're really difficult to find. Those Sauternes casks, they are incredibly, they're like hen's teeth. That for us was, a big risk when we did it in the 21, 24, 28. That fed into a lot of the interesting things that we've done on the peated. I think sherry is obviously one that we've done a lot of, and maybe some of these smaller, the Pedro Jimenez casks from the Jimenez Spinola would be quite interesting. I think it's a well-trodden path, obviously, sherry casks and peated malt. I'd be interested to see what maybe some of the weirder, the wonderful, the Wonders of Wood would do. I think the interesting thing that we'd found is that the Amberana actually was the favorite on the night. We've done some stuff with cherry wood as well, which again, if you want to layer in some complexities, do it for the right reasons. We don't want to mask a lot of those fruit flavors that are actually coming from the distillate. We don't want to mask that lovely peat, that smoke. But what we want to do is add. And I think if you're doing it for the right reasons, but we always say there are the ones that work and the ones that don't work. And again, there's been plenty that haven't worked. That's the nature of innovation. And I think this is our first bat with peated, and we have a few other things going in the background that I think in years to come will probably be quite interesting. And we've also been really, really blessed with some of the collaboration partners that we've worked with. So we got our hands on some really cool Shiraz Australian wine barrels from a guy called Jim Barry, or a winery over in Australia called Jim Barry, who we did a collaboration with last year on their Armagh Shiraz. And that gave us food for thought for the next in our Renaissance series, where we use some Shiraz casks. So again, no shortage of options. I think it's just do it for the right reasons. And I think you can almost, become that one of you're doing too much without giving people enough time to really understand why you did what you did on the first one. And that's probably our fault, because we just love making whiskey.
Sorry, my cat's just appeared. She wants to know.
She's an avid peated single malt drinker. This is it.
She likes like the more savoury side of life, so I think she's going for the peated milk.
I actually think it was maybe Becky Paskin had a cat as well, and I remember something similar happening where she said the cat was the one who predetermined which whiskies they were going to have or something. So a full sensory experience.
You don't normally get cats at whiskey festivals, so perhaps that's the upside to doing everything virtually.
Exactly.
Is like I wanted to ask you a little bit more about the Shiraz cask. So is this an ongoing partnership? Is there more to come from this particular partnership?
Yeah, good question. I think we had a guy called Martin Lynch, who's based over in Australia, who just met them. It's a father and son combo, and they were actually over launching some wines in Ireland, actually. And I think they came for whatever reason. I was bloody out of the office the day that they came, and Alex, I think, got to drink some phenomenal wines with these guys, and that started the relationship. We actually met them subsequently over in Vinexpo in Asia in 2018. So again, none of these projects happen that quickly. So we've been speaking about doing other things with them, and the whole thing is trying to get casks from Australia to Ireland. It just takes forever, unfortunately. So again, it's a watch this space. I think we've got some other. We did some local collaborations with actually a German winery with some Pinot Noir and some Riesling casks. Which again, I think what we try and do is go out and find some like-minded producers and produce in the locality, and then go over there and launch it and have some semblance of relevancy to the local market, but have a bit of fun with it as well. Like these guys are great. A lot of these producers are, either wine or spirits producers. We've done some stuff with the Kiro guys. We've done some stuff with some craft brewery guys, Plantation. I think there are a lot of really cool, innovative people doing things in the drinks industry. And, out of every industry, we find relationships matter so much more in alcohol, because it's such a long process to make things. And I think everyone shares mutual respect for anyone who can build or launch a brand in any way, because it's a huge ordeal. And I think for us, it's just finding those people who are open to having a bit of fun. And I think there's some interesting things coming to the UK as well. We've done some ginger beer collabs with the guys in the Sun Tavern and the Umbrella Group, Andy and the gang there. We know them for years. So hoping to launch that. And I think no shortage of ideas, just sometimes it's focus. That's what we need. And I think...
I was going to say, I feel like I've never really encountered another sector of drinks, or even in general, other than sort of, spirits and craft drinks in general, where there is this mutual appreciation. And there's an understanding that, everyone can share customers and share fans. Like, just because you love one brand doesn't mean you won't love another. And actually, it's the philosophy of production that I think people fall in love with, the philosophy of craft, experimentation, like loving flavor, all of this. I know that's true. Like, it just fascinates me endlessly, and every time there's a genuine, meaningful partnership and the product is born from it, it's incredibly exciting.
And the interesting thing is there are so many similarities to people's stories that, like, it's almost like it's almost like group therapy where we share our challenges. And I think the great thing about it is, like that, it's collaboration. It's not like, why are you doing this? And a lot of it's based around that independent mindset that, they're open to probably telling each other's stories. And I think we've done that very well with some of our partners, and Alexander from Plantation and some of the other guys have been very, very generous with their time. Came to Ireland. Guy Rob Caldwell, who some of you may have known, our global brand ambassador, he runs a thing called the Phoenix Forum, where we can bring in some local trades that they come in and they can ask questions and learn more about probably categories that they wouldn't get exposure to, and different things. Yeah, I think there'll be, hopefully, as I said, when the world gets a little bit more normal, more of that, because I think the virtual world, look, it's fine, it's great. There's going to be more of it in the future. I do think getting in a room and telling the stories, as we know, you can't really beat it. And as I said, having my little sneaky bottles that I can pull out from under the counter, and I think is going to be important as well. And I think the fact that the Whisky Show has gone forward for me is brilliant, because it's, again, an opportunity for people who would normally probably go to a lot of these whiskey shows to even log on and hear about new products and, have a feel of some form of community that I think whiskey drinkers are, we are a very special, different community. People really, really buy into brands, distilleries, are very loyal to going each year and, listening and stuff like that. So hopefully more good things we can do virtually, on the pretense that, in the near future, everyone can get their liquid on lips and samples and different things like that.
I mean, it's the dream annual kind of like get together, really. Yeah. I think like you see that you catch up with old friends, you share a dram, and you can't ever compare that. Although I'm sharing a dram with you all now, which is fabulous.
I know. I think things could be a lot worse. Yes.
Yeah. No, I feel like this is a really good kind of topic of conversation to move everything on to looking at the future of Irish whiskey, which is obviously so exciting. There's so much momentum. And again, just to say, if you're watching and you've got questions for Stephen, do pop them in the sidebar. Like, the more the merrier, honestly.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I've got a really broad question for you, first of all. Like, where is Irish whiskey going? We're seeing this incredibly diverse category emerge, with people moving in different directions, doing new things. Like, is this sustainable? What are we going to see over the next sort of 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, really good question. The question we get all the time, because I think there's so much going on. Everyone's like, whoa, okay, can little old Ireland sustain, a lot of these things? Look, I think I was saying to you, the energy and the passion and the people that are involved in it, I think it will almost be a self-fulfilling story, or, as long as people are doing things for the right reasons. So what we would always say is the category doesn't need more Me Too's. So the category doesn't need more similar styles of flavors, because that's already been done and done well. People, that consumer is totally happy. It's more about what comes next. So what are you doing in your liquid, in your process, that is interesting enough to be able to compete on a world scale? Because you're not even competing just against Irish whiskies now. You're competing against world whiskies. You're competing against every premium spirit that, if you're trying to justify why somebody will buy your liquid, you really need to have a compelling story. And I think the liquid in the bottle, you cannot get away from it. It's the only thing you can control. And I think one of the big things is you could have a beautiful story. You could be the nicest people in the world. If your liquid doesn't match up, they will never buy another bottle. And I think the quality aspect is what we hammer home every time. Try and focus on making really, really high quality Irish whiskies that are interesting enough to add to the category, rather than try and take, because the category is still at its infancy. We're at, nearly 12 million cases last year, going by rough estimates. There's so much further we can go, and we're on the cusp. We've been banging on about the segmentation of Irish whiskey for probably 15 or 20 years, and to see it actually happen now is hugely refreshing. So we're selling now in about 70 countries around the globe. We sold nearly 1 million bottles of premium Irish whiskey last year, which again is mind-blowing, from something that didn't exist. So premium and super premium Irish whiskey, when we launched, there was nobody in that space. So that is becoming much, much more populated. There's loads of really interesting things happening. There are a lot of the bigger multinationals now have come into Irish whiskey. There are a lot of really good young, innovative, passionate people now creating Irish whiskey that I feel are going to accelerate that premium repertoire consumers' acceptance for Irish whiskey. And I think you probably, if you're at the Whisky Show today in even in the virtual world, there are probably a lot more interesting Irish whiskies been spoken about than there would be 5 years ago. There's 30 plus distilleries going in Ireland, from small to massive. There are distillery projects in places in Ireland that haven't seen distilling in hundreds of years. There are consumers all around the world now probably discovering Irish whiskey in a very different way, and that for me can only be a good thing. And as I said to you, if people do the right things, the projected growth is there, and there'll be winners and losers, as there are in every category. You look at the shakeout in craft beer, craft bourbon, the winners and losers in that Scotch roller coaster for the last 100 years. It's just the nature of it. But I think take a long-term approach. There are no shortcuts in whiskey. There are absolutely.
It's going to take time. A year is a year. 3 years is 3 years.
There is, as I said to you, no easy way to do it. It's one of those ones that you have to take a long-term view. And I think as long as that continues, and there are interesting people making interesting whiskies, the future can only be bright, And I think there's a reason it is growing really quickly. People enjoy the taste profile, in particular, the newer generation who are drinking premium whiskey enjoy that taste profile. And I think in particular as well, drinking is quite cyclical. So you don't tend to drink what your parents drank. So bourbon and Irish whiskey, and let's say pick the US, because that's 50% of the world's Irish whiskey sales are in the US, predominantly in 6 or 7 states. American whiskey and Irish whiskey were totally underrepresented for probably 40 or 50 years. Then out of nowhere, a new generation started drinking them, and that has just exploded. And we're seeing it in Ireland probably the last 4 or 5 years. We're seeing it in Germany. We're seeing it in a lot of these more mature markets that a new generation are discovering Irish whiskey for the first time in a very different way. And, Russia is a big market for it, Eastern Europe. And I do think in the absence of lots of different players and different styles, it would be hard to probably sustain that growth or to keep people interested, because they're so promiscuous in categories now that they travel around much quicker, that in the absence of having interesting things to keep them talking and energized and, collecting and talking to their buddies about it, I think we'd struggle. Whereas now that there's this good, healthy amount of competition going out there and making the case for Irish whiskey, I think should be a positive.
I think 100% for sure. Like there's so much news coming out of Ireland. Like if you write about drinks or you follow drinks news, then there's always good stuff coming. Yeah. A really interesting question from Jason's come through. You guys have been super transparent the whole way through about sourced whiskey versus your own spirit. You mentioned earlier on the call about how exciting it is that now you're releasing liquids that you've distilled. Yeah. Just a question really, how you're managing that transition from this much older source liquid.
Yeah. Look, a very, very fair question. And I think the good thing about probably our experience in Cooley is that we were very adept at making different styles of whiskey. So when we were setting up, we understood the spec that we wanted to create with the distillery in Dublin. So I see what he said there about the transition. It's already happened. So we have transitioned our malt into the small batch into Dublin. And I think he's yet to see it, but we have a different proprietary bottle mold now for everything that has been made out of Dublin. So again, probably some different iconography and stuff like that will signify when the transition will happen. And, the distillery started in March 2015. So, we're coming out the back of 5.5 years. So we've a good breadth now of aged products that we've started to layer in. So the grain that we have sourced from, and he speaks about a GND here. My dad, not to be outdone by his 2 sons, went and built, I think, the second biggest distillery in Ireland with a huge grain facility about an hour north of Dublin called Great Northern. So we were then in a position that we protected both ends. So we had our production in Dublin, and we have production up in Great Northern to source all of our grain, and all of the grain is ours now. The aged products, because you can't recreate 28-year-old whiskey in 5 years unless you're doing something funny.
There's going to be a problem with something along the line if that's the case.
I think, look, they'll sustain in the older packaging, but anything that we have now produced from Dublin will have our proprietary bottle molds that will call out the fact that it's been distilled in Dublin, and then we'll be transitioning to a single malt from Dublin probably early next year. So yeah, look, it's I don't actually have it on me. He's asking, do I have a sneaky look at the Black Pits bottle that I shouldn't even be showing yet because it's not out till all the bottle products from probably the end of, I think it was the end of July now, would have the proprietary bottle molds. So we can get it to him. Sure, we know Whiskey Jason. He's very involved in the Irish whiskey space. So we can get Chris or one of the guys to get you a picture of it.
Yeah, which is really exciting, and I think it kind of just marks almost like a changing of the guard. Like, this is liquid now, you're owning that, and that's incredibly exciting.
I think we didn't know what way to go with it. Like, as in, do you change the label, or do you know? And we said, look, people have been with us the whole way. It's very interesting for people, I think, to see our evolution from, I suppose, from the source stuff that we took from previous distillery to putting our own spin in it to now having our own stuff. And Black Pits will be number 2 in the Dublin-distilled series, and there's only more to come. Again, you can't rush these things because of the nature of whiskey, but the future is very bright. We created the flexibility to be able to create over 1 million liters of alcohol per year in the distillery. We've laid down a lot of stock on the hope that there are a lot of curious people wanting to discover more styles of Irish whiskey, and you got to back yourself in whiskey, and you just got to believe that what you're doing in the production process and all the blood, sweat, and tears of going out into market, all the guys, like there's Chris, James, there's Rob, there's every one of our team who a lot of these people at the shows would know because they've gone and they do all the hard yards of the whiskey shows. You got to believe that on 5, 10, 15 years that this will pay off, because you just can't you can't be in a situation where you don't have stock. It's that's some of the challenges I would imagine for people getting into it now, that they have to back themselves, and it's an expensive game. You have to source barrels, you have to warehouse the barrels, you have to produce the whiskey, and it is like, it's a funny, my dad said, like, if you ever were to present this to a logical economic person, they would think you are mad, because the more successful you are, the more money you have to put in. So if, let's say, you sell 1 million bottles this year, you have to then put the money back in to make that. So it's a very interesting industry, and I think there's probably a reason it's been dominated for 40, 50 years by these big multinationals. It's not for the faint-hearted. Again, as I said to you, I think the only thing probably the smaller guys can do is back themselves, back the quality, spot that gap. And we really felt that gap when we were there's no better place to get a consumer insight than at a whiskey show, because they're so honest, they're almost hurt your feelings. So there's no hiding from it, where you bring out your liquids, you taste the people. Some of these guys are incredibly knowledgeable about whiskey, and we felt some of the feedback we were getting when we were traveling the world selling my dad's whiskeys, were that there was an opportunity there to take the conversation to the next level, to really, really change the liquid from what had been done there before to something that maybe people weren't expecting, and that probably the older brands that we were promoting, they didn't have that ability because of what they were. You can't recreate or reinvent an older style of Irish whiskey, because that's just what it is. It would be a negative for it. So whereas this, we were like, wow, talking about now in the future, which was so refreshing for us as a newer generation of Irish people, because so much of Ireland was nostalgia, the good old days and back in the day, and all looking backward. Whereas for us, we were saying, look, we're part of that unique generation who've traveled the world. You know, I've blessed, I've been on the Bourbon Trail, I've been to Islay, I've been all over the world, had exposure to things that my father's generation wouldn't have. And we said, look, let's create something, an Irish whiskey that speaks to our generation, that we feel is something that will be interesting to the whiskey drinker. And there was a total change in that. You know, they were saying, what are you doing now? It wasn't about the past, it was about now. And we see that in the distillery. You know, we've, 100,000 plus people there last year, where they're so interested in now. They want the history side, but they're like, whoa, what are you doing now? Like, the history is fine, it gives you your roots, it gives you the reason of why you're there, but who are you? Like, what are you doing now? And I had so many people say, geez, you're real. We thought, I was saying, yeah, we would have hired much more attractive actors if I wasn't real. or my dad has been in the distillery, and if anyone has been to the distillery or met my father, or, he himself and my mother are always in there, where they used to be a lot more on a Sunday, and they have their own groupies and they have their gang of people. But we had people put up TripAdvisor, and they're like, oh, it's so cute. The owners hired an actor to play their dad because he's going around shaking hands.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, we were saying, Dad, you need to act better. You need to be more genuine. But yeah, I think people cannot believe that, in particular, that there's real people behind it, because so many things, as you know yourself now, are more, I suppose, marketing rather than reality. And I think that's why people love whiskey. It's real. You can't take the shortcuts. It's not like vodka or anything like that. It's not mass produced. So much goes in to making the product. So many hands, so much time, so much goes into making whiskey. That's why I find people who drink whiskey are so passionate about talking about it. It's a whiskey community.
Yeah, I love it. And on that note, we've got like literally 3 minutes left. I don't know where the time's gone. I feel like I've got a whole page of questions that I haven't even got around to asking you, because it's just been such a joy.
Typical Teeling, probably just waffling away for the whole thing. But I think it's just, for me, I love talking Irish whiskey. I love getting an opportunity to talk about it, because I do personally feel, look, speed bumps, barriers, these things are always part and parcel of the journey. I do feel incredibly passionate about the future of Irish whiskey, from seeing the people that are involved in it, from, my own enjoyment of what we do, to the people who visit, to, the acceptance levels. I do personally think in the next 5 to 10 years, this is going to be our time. And I think we just have to grasp it. I think we have to believe in the liquids. We have to believe in the story, and we have to go out there and fight for it, because look, it's a competitive market. The Japanese whiskeys are doing very well. There's, Taiwanese whiskey, there's American single malts, there's Swedish, nobody is just going to come to us. We have to go out there. And I think that is going to be the challenge for the next 5, 10, 15 years. Get out there, make the case, get as much liquid on lips as we can. Once we're through this speed bump and people can travel again, when they come to Ireland, go around, try different distilleries, try different things. Look, it's an exciting time, and I think it just for us as a family who've been in it from the 80s, when it was a very, very dark time for Irish whiskey, to where it is now, it's just hugely encouraging. And sure, if we have to drink all the whiskey ourselves, I'm sure I can invite a few people around for a party or two.
Great. And I can safely say, I think for me and on behalf of everyone here, like, you have got a very engaged and captive audience, and yeah, you and your family are making some incredible whiskies, and thank you so much for sharing them, and thank you for giving us a sneak peek as well for what's
Chrissy, coming. The gang, pleasure as always. When I can have a dram with you in person, we'll be on that plane. But till then, stay safe. Thank you for getting on, and enjoy a few more drams tonight.
Absolutely. Thanks everyone for watching. Thanks for some questions.
Talk to you soon.
See you soon, Stephen. Take care.
Bye.